A tabletop gamer who doesn't enjoy D&D? Stick around while I try to defend my claim to nerddom. Roll initiative.
Round 1. Fight!
Hi Game Masters and welcome to SRD. We're a second-rate production to help make you a first-rate GM.
You may have caught us on Nerdarchy, where during an interview, I made a claim that I do not like Dungeons & Dragons. Today, I am here to defend my honor as a nerd and tell you why I just simply don't prefer it as a tabletop system.
So Bre, what do you have against the good old classic Dungeons & Dragons?
It's not so much that I have anything against D&D. Like many people, D&D was my gateway drug into tabletop gaming, and I enjoyed it for the time that I played it. But then I expanded my horizons into other tabletop games, and I simply found that D&D just wasn't what I enjoyed most. I am going to continue to anger people here. Let me get my shield ready. I do not enjoy the fantasy setting, and as we've talked about in our previous videos, when you're sitting down and you're getting ready to prepare your concept for your game, that's one of the things that you have to take into consideration is your setting. And I did not enjoy anything that Tolkien ever wrote. And
I don't really know how we ended up getting married. It happened, but she lied to me and told me that it was the greatest thing she'd ever seen.
So when we started D&D, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the game. I enjoyed getting together with a group of friends and rolling dice and the times that we had. But what I found is that the setting just didn't fit for me. And I was pretty much the only one. So, I still went with it and had a great time, but, it's something to consider, like we've been saying, the setting. And for me, the setting of fantasy just isn't one that fits for me. What I found really to be more my wheelhouse was the, mysterious writings of H.P. Lovecraft and the Cthulhu mythos, and that's something that I enjoyed more. So one of the things that we hope that you get from this channel is to not be afraid to broaden your horizons into trying other systems and other settings, and to find that there are so many other worlds out there to explore other than Dungeons and Dragons and orcs and elves. There are other things that exist outside of the universe that Tolkien built. Not that that's not an enjoyable setting for a lot of people, but for some it just doesn't fit. Now,
Sir, so what you're talking about is specifically settings. What I enjoy about Dungeons & Dragons isn't the setting, it's the system. I am not a fan of the D100 system. I think it's kind of sloppy. It is rolling a D100 and then trying to get under something is kind of boring, and I'm just not a fan of it. I don't think it feels, it doesn't feel good to me to do that. I love the setting of it. I love the stories, and I think that you can accomplish those same stories regardless of any system.
Right, so you were talking about, not enjoying the percentile dice. I would almost fundamentally disagree with that for me, because you're looking at the D20 system, and you roll, you add your buffs, your rebuffs to it, you add your modifiers to it. But with Cthulhu, it's just percentile, whether it's your percentage of success or failure. So you're looking at, well, this says that I have an 80% chance or a 90% chance of success, and you're just rolling to beat that percentage. So to me, it's very logical in a very illogical world.
Sure. You could take Dungeons & Dragons and you could accomplish the same type of horror and mystery and depth that you're looking for. However, it will be, at least in basic, it's going to be in your fantasy setting, which is why there was D20 Modern, there was Shadowrun, and some other ones that bring that kind of thing up to the forefront. Now, back in 3.5, they did make a Call of Cthulhu D20 system.
I guess a fundamental difference that I've found between Dungeons & Dragons and Call of Cthulhu is that a lot of people will tell you when you go to play Cthulhu that what's the point? You're either going to die or go insane as a character. And a lot of people struggle with that. For me, there's a beauty in that. There's a beauty in the finality of it. I'm not worried at all about character creation in Cthulhu. I'm not worried necessarily about the development of my character, be it one shot or campaign, because they are going to die or go crazy. God rest their soul. Cthulhu rest their soul, whatever. I mean, however you want to put it. So it's not so much that I'm worried about the actions that I choose affecting my character as I am about the story. And for me, it's that story that I get immersed in. It's so much easier for me to immerse myself in the Cthulhu mythos and in a Cthulhu campaign or one shot because it is so story driven. And for those who aren't familiar with Cthulhu or that you've never tried it, you are essentially an investigator of some sorts, and you're not by virtue of the game, not by your job title or your character's profession. Right. You could be an actress or an actor or a student, whatever, what have you, but you are forced into a situation where the occult, either knowingly or unknowingly, unbeknownst to you, has set into play a series of events that one of the great old ones is trying to be resurrected or brought into the world. And so all these strange events are occurring around you, and you either have knowledge of the fact that this is occurring or you don't, but either way, your player is involved in these events. And you're trying either desperately to stop them or you're trying desperately just to survive or figure out what is happening. And that story arc is what is so appealing to me in Cthulhu, because my character is going to die or go crazy or something unfortunate is going to happen to them. So I'm not very concerned about my character or their development. I don't have to worry about, building a minotaur that has an orc head on a chain, and I've put so much love and care into crafting this character and getting a mini and making it, only for it, this one flaw, this quirk that I've put into this character being the demise of my character, and then it torturing me for years after. Also see our Nerdarchy interview for the backstory on that. It may happen, and then I don't care, because it's still something that furthers the storyline that I'm involved in. And that, for me, is what is so appealing about Call of Cthulhu, is because that story is going to develop with or without my character. Rip the sheet, get a new one, and it's going to continue to develop. And my feelings aren't hurt.
Right, so what you're talking about there is you're talking about more you remember the stories, the individual stories that you've had with Call of Cthulhu, but you don't remember the characters.
No.
Right. So that fundamentally is not necessarily the difference between Dungeons & Dragons and Call of Cthulhu, but the definition of difference between a one-shot and a campaign. So because Call of Cthulhu doesn't necessarily lend itself to a very coherent campaign, it can, but it's not going to be long. It sure as hell isn't going to be 2 years or 5 years or 10 or 20 that you will see Dungeons & Dragons campaigns last that long.
See, I would slightly disagree with you in that. A game that you're familiar with, but maybe our players aren't, Time Stories, for example. Mm-hmm. Take Time Stories, where your characters essentially work for an organization where you are traveling through time trying to stop an event. View those characters as that. When one of those characters dies and you just pick up another one and continue to move on, you as the character are that. You're just inhabiting another body. I mean, you're just moving on. You still have your player knowledge, and you still have, your player knowledge still carries. So I would disagree. I think a campaign is definitely lent to Cthulhu. You just have to have the right game master to do it. And I think people limit themselves to thinking that it will only last a few sessions in a Call of Cthulhu game because they just see, well, I'm going to die or go crazy. But again, you're focusing too much on the character. You have to stop looking at it as it's about the character. The Call of Cthulhu isn't about the characters. It's about what's happening outside of the characters. And even more so, it's not even necessarily about what's happening directly to the characters. It's about what's occurring outside of, and about unfolding that mystery of what's occurring outside the immediate actions of the game.
Sure. So what you're talking about is more of some of the old school thought process when it came to D&D. So Tomb of Horrors, all right? Okay. So Tomb of Horrors is probably the best example for what Call of Cthulhu is. You will die, bring 8 characters, Do not get attached to a single one, because that's what's going to happen. So the problem with that is that what we've done in probably the last 10 years, this whole renaissance of gaming, is that is not what role-playing games have become. So used to be, it was player versus GM. It was sitting down at the table, and I've created this dungeon, and we're gonna have these sweet traps and these things, and I'm gonna kill these players. And it was their job not to die. If you didn't die, or if you died, you sucked, move on, grab another character sheet, or leave the table. There were some tables I've played at where like you were done, get out. So there's that mindset that has evolved to this new thing where like it's this combined storytelling. And that's a lot about what we talk about here. And it's become this better, bigger thing where instead of the GM telling the story to them, is a story together. It is about the characters. It is about their background. It is about taking that character and bringing it into yourself and watching it grow over time. The problem with games like Call of Cthulhu or Tomb of Horrors for that matter, which is why you don't see a true reprint in 5th edition, or really even 4th edition didn't reprint one, is because...
Counterpoint, there was one in 4th. I ran it for my game and I loved it.
That was homebrewed.
It was beautiful.
It was still homebrewed. And I love it. Like, I love to play something like that. I think it's a lot of fun, but it's not what your typical standard campaign is. And I think when people look, and that's the reason why you see differences in sales on certain games. It has nothing to do with marketing, and it has to do with what's been done. And yes, when you look at tabletop role-playing games, you really see the two big names. There is, people think of Call of Cthulhu, because that's really being grown in the last about 5 or 6 years. And of course, Dungeons and Dragons. That is the name, the staple that people know. Even though Pathfinder is a great game, it's Dungeons and Dragons that people know. And they have really sucked that up and really done a good job with 5th edition. So when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, one of them is really outselling the other. It
may be, but you say that it's about the player, player versus GM. I just don't see it as that's an issue here, because we'll take Tomb of Horrors, for example. I love Tomb of Horrors because for me it wasn't even about I'm going to kill these players. I mean, sure, it was a side effect, but it was testing the ability of the players to find the puzzles and the trap, or to figure out the puzzles and find the traps and defeat them. It was challenging them as players, challenging their skills, and it does challenge their teamwork.
Some of them were, do you decide to turn left or right?
Fair enough.
Period, without any clues. Actually, I think the very first encounter of Tomb of Horrors is like, do you choose the left path or the right path? And one of them is like instant death.
That's Darwinism.
Instant death.
It's Darwinism. But with Cthulhu, there really, there are some, if you want to throw in the instant death as a GM, you can. But like I said, for me, it isn't about just killing off the players. Yes, it will happen. Yes, they will go crazy. Sure, that's going to happen, but it's not, I don't think for me as a player, okay, switching from GM to player, for me as a player involved in a Call of Cthulhu game, it doesn't take away from my experience as a player, for me personally, because there is still so much to gain from working to solve the mystery, from working to defeat whatever the greater evil is. Or become part of that greater evil, for that matter, depending on your motives. And so I guess it's just shifting your focus from what goal you're working toward. For me in D&D, it was more making your character great, make your character great again. Whereas in Cthulhu, it was, either allowing the great old ones to rise or not allowing them to rise. And, you were either working with Miskatonic or you were working against them, and kind of choosing your sides and which one was going to flourish. And it's truly good versus evil. And I just really more enjoyed the story focus rather than the individual focus, if that makes sense.
I think at the end of the day, basically what we're getting down to is that there is a system, a game that everyone can enjoy. Some people enjoy, Call of Cthulhu, more darker games where they're giving up some player agency for the story, allowing the character progression not to take the limelight, but really the story to be centerfold and just kind of allow that to go forward. Or in games like Dungeons & Dragons, where the characters really are the center stage and the story can be adapted or moved to the background based on that. Long story short, there's a game for everybody, and there's plenty of them out there. So the more that you get out there, the more that you experience, the better GM that you're going to be. Both of us have played these games and a bunch of others. Both of them, we've taken different things from each one of them and put them together. I love to put sanity in my D&D games, as well as really pretty much any game that I play in, because I think sanity is
It's fun. It's just fun.
It's a real effect. You know, it's something that you would definitely be dealing with. But regardless, if you like these kind of videos, let us know down below in the underbits.
Let us know in the underbits who won, D&D or Call of Cthulhu, and did I properly defend my right to nerddom?
Remember, there's a like and a subscribe button there. If you like us, go ahead and hit it. And if you want to see more, go ahead and hit that subscribe button as well.
I'd hit it.
See you next week.